begging Epstein to sort of facilitate things because Jeffrey Epstein is a much more powerful individual than a former Israeli prime minister and defense minister.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Rory, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics, as always, is Robert Morris. How are you this time?
Well, I'm okay, Rory. I'm a little disturbed, though. My government is apparently shutting down.
Yes, because I'm supposed to have the joke government, because I think we went 2 years without the government doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that when it's a bit scarier when it's sort of the country that kind of runs the world.
Yeah, the United States has a few, not to say that, Northern Ireland government, has a difficult and important task, of course, but there's a lot more riding on the United States functioning. And it appears that the Democrats seem to have found some kind of spine and are attempting finally to stand up to Trump on, the basics of his running roughshod over congressional powers and the Constitution. And yeah, the government is apparently, I think, might already be shut down. The way these things work, it think it was groundbreaking and shocking when this happened during the Clinton administration. And things had gotten so bad that people couldn't get along enough to just make the government work. But this has been a
recurring
to say the least. And it is potentially apocalyptic on a lot of levels. There's a lot of services that are, as of today, no longer being required. However, of course, a lot of no longer being provided. Of course, a lot of government agencies, having seen this happen for 30 years now, have done a better job of apportioning and doing reserves. But
is it not kind of horrible because a lot of people were laid off because of Doge?
Mm-hmm.
That's been rectified as, those people are on vacation. So it's very possible, that they're hiring them back and they're just having them still paid. And it was just a very stressful vacation when you thought you couldn't get another job.
Oh, no, I think a lot of the Doge people are just gone.
Oh, no, but I think they've hired some back. So it's possible you've literally come back and the government's now shut down again.
Yeah, some people have had that experience. But yeah, they've definitely, the federal workforce has been pretty seriously beat up. They have great benefits and they have some would argue, a much more relaxed work culture than the private sector. But the flip side of that is you have to deal with these periodic shutdowns. And now, of course, Donald Trump has just taken a extra constitutional buzzsaw to everything. I so often joke that it's this one is not, I believe, directly tied to the debt ceiling, but it is, the debt ceiling and North Korea nuclear bombs are two things that
I think it was they were tying other stuff to the debt ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Democrats were like, no, we're not taking this like little extra bit that's being tacked on.
Well, that's entirely possible because as with the North Korean nuclear bombs, I resolutely do not pay attention to the government shutdown news because like North Korean nuclear bombs, it is potentially catastrophic, like world systemic catastrophic. But usually folks back down and figure it out after a couple weeks. And I think it has gotten to a month or two at sometimes of sort of brinksmanship. Everything eventually gets settled. And I don't know, with Donald Trump, it could be different. Donald Trump, potentially could enjoy not having to deal with congressional oversight for the next, for the duration of this Congress. Anything's possible, but it's likely that we'll get a version of Taco, and it's entirely possible that by the time we're recording this on a Wednesday, and, Taco, Trump always chickens out, recording this on a Wednesday, there could be a deal by Monday. Or, maybe there won't be a deal for a year and a half, in which case we'll spend a lot of time talking about the government shutdown on this podcast. It's sort of early days yet, and we'll see.
Isn't it great that the American military's been sorted? Because apparently beards was the big issue, and now they have to shave again.
Yeah, it's I am not familiar with the details of this. As someone who is experiencing like a gross face thing with beards right now, I'll get a little boil here.
And then growing hair.
Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty gross. Whatever it is, if it goes on for another couple of days, I'm gonna have to get it looked at. But my understanding is actually that well, this is filtered through Blue Sky, so who knows? Maybe this is just liberal fantasizing. But this disproportionately affects African-American soldiers, a large part of
which make up a large part of the American army.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly African Americans are
Like, I
represented
think
in the
the
military.
normal ranks is like, shockingly diverse. And it's one of the things I'm always reminded of the scene from
Hmm.
Full Metal Jacket where he uses a lot of racist terms and he says, I don't care what color you are, you're a Marine. I
Interesting.
feel like that's kind of it. I want bodies and I just don't care. So if a different shaving routine helps black people join, then so be it. And now that's going to be rolled back.
Yes, and I think Hegseth is pretty explicit occasionally, certainly very explicit on wanting a more male military. And this is seen as because even the Trump administration can't quite be explicit about wanting a more white military. This particular strategy is seen as a way to cut down on African Americans in service, because apparently more African Americans have a issue with shaving that generates issues, and have been benefiting from the ability to grow a beard. Yeah, I mean God, don't get me started. I mean, it is. I did a short on this. It's really Imperial Japan or 1940s Germany, not in the fascist sense, but in just the loser sense. Like if you've gotta make yourself more savage, if you've got to call everybody in to make lectures on about how we got to be tougher and bloodier, it's usually an indication that, like Imperial Japan or 1940s Germany, you're a loser. Like it's loser ideology
But is
fundamentally.
it not that he kind of has nothing to do, but because he's from TV, he kind of everything has to be a show? It can't, like, this could literally be an email.
Yeah, Pete Hegseth has installed a makeup studio at the Pentagon,
Oh, really?
so he can do garbage like this. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
but this is what Donald Trump hired him for. Donald Trump
Yeah.
is the TV president, and he hired a TV guy at the Department of Defense. And it's much like Trump himself. Hegseth is obviously a further leap downwards, but it is an example of a just sort of spiraling, tumbling down a hill. It's a slippery slope we've been falling down since at least the end of the Cold War, and probably significantly before that, of just everything turning into this sort of gross, corrupt game about appearances more than anything else. And that is actually what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to be talking a bit about the intersection between national security policy and Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, I think it's good that, like, we can
Mm.
talk about Epstein more because it seems like Barack Obama,
Mm.
he seems like he was very friendly with them.
Ah,
So
yes,
it's not so
yes.
much Trump. It's not so much Trump. Don't worry about Trump and Epstein.
As explosive as that would be, and as happy I would be to break that news, Rory, we are actually talking about Jeffrey Epstein's relationship with Ehud Barak, who was a
Oh,
prime minister of Israel at a important time, and was the defense minister for a number of years after that.
he's not the one that was imprisoned, was he? No, because I know there was the prime minister before Benjamin Netanyahu is currently in jail, is he?
Is he? Yeah, Ehud Olmert. Yeah, 6 years in prison.
Because remember that as an example of how sort of democratic Israel is, that they will
Hmm.
imprison their leaders. But Benjamin's still not in jail.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Olmert was in jail between 2014 and 2017. Interesting. So Ehud Barak was prime minister between 1999 and 2001. He is then was the defense minister, apparently for a prime minister that Rory had just pointed out, went to jail. Defense minister between 2007 and 2013. And the connection between Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein had been long known and long speculated about, and was a sort of fertile ground for people like, wait, what is this sex offender doing with the prime minister of Israel? What's actually going on here? And as we've talked about a bit on this channel before, Jeffrey Epstein is not really my favorite topic. I think that he's a disgusting man who facilitated disgusting things done by powerful people. But really, this idea that, like, he was running some kind of world-spanning sex ring with infinite salacious details yet to come, I don't really buy it. But what's very interesting, and I think this whole episode is going to function as kind of advertisement for a very impressive news organization called Dropsite News, is that a whole bunch of new light has been put on what is actually going on with Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein, and it is Sadly, it does not involve adrenochrome, Satan, weird sex acts with the whole Clinton family or anything like that. But I would honestly argue that what it illustrates is a little more boring than all that. It's not as salacious or fun, but it's honestly more disturbing. It's what we've got is Ehud Barak, nominally a very powerful person who was in charge of certainly the most influential of the U.S.'s proxy countries for a number of years, a position of power there, just sort of really currying favor and kind of toadying and begging for influence and scraps from Jeffrey Epstein, who's just this finance guy in New York. And I was very excited to read this article that we're going to be focusing on today, despite the fact that it seems to focus on kind of a minor issue. Specifically, there was a trove of emails from Ehud Barak that were leaked a number of years ago. The drop site had done the due diligence necessary to verify all this. And what's exciting, and why I think everyone should go subscribe to Dropside News, is that they promise that this is just the first in a series of articles focusing specifically on Jeffrey Epstein's relationship to Israel's military industries and the U.S. military industries. And I think it's probably unsurprising to most of our audience that now that Jeffrey Epstein is plausibly directly connected to the military-industrial complex, I'm a lot more interested in talking about him. I do want to say, to be clear, he's a gross sex offender. He facilitated gross sex crimes. But that is not what Jeffrey Epstein was. That is not the main thing that Jeffrey Epstein was. It's interesting. Might have seemed promising that this cache of emails revealed pictures from Epstein's mansion and Ehud Barak in Epstein's mansion, sitting next to his wife.
Yeah. They're quite ordinary.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe his wife was coming to the sex parties, but I think it's actually much more likely and sadder, frankly, that Ehud Barak was not going to Epstein for salacious sex appetites, but because this was a powerful guy and financiers, Wall Street people in New York City are a lot more powerful than prime ministers of piddling little countries like Israel. And I think that
Are financiers like a real thing, or are they kind of like a weird like middleman that does a lot of stuff like this that isn't very good at investing money? But it's a bit like apparently if you work for like a spying agency, you say you're the cleaner. Is it a bit like that for governments?
Well, the real money in Wall Street is not, in fact. There are a few autistic folks, like you remember all the Big Short people who really do figure out
crunch the numbers.
What's that? Yeah, crunch the numbers and figure out that they're right and everybody else is wrong. And it's usually quite amusing because whenever one of those people is lionized as a world historical genius, I'm thinking of Michael Burry specifically, who was played by Christian Bale in The Big Short. Whenever one of those people is lionized as this world historical genius, almost always he will get the next thing completely wrong. At the end of The Big Short, they're like, Michael Burry has now decided to invest in water. Get scared about that. And like 5 years after The Big Short came out, it was Michael Burry quietly disinvests from all of his water investments. It's not like, it's incredibly rare and incredibly lucky to
be right all
the time. What you do get I think pop culture is getting a little bit better at illustrating this. You get to either do crime, and depending on where regulation is at any given time, like the sort of circle of what is a crime and what is influence and connections sort of goes back and forth. After the Great Depression, it used to just be everything was influence and connections, and it was perfectly fine before the Great Depression to do insider trading, to game the markets, to basically everything you can do in crypto today, you used to be able to do in the general markets, and that was fine, and it didn't matter that you were trading on inside information from politicians and heads of corporations. That was all fine. After the Great Depression, that got a lot more complicated because a lot of the more traditional ways that you can make money on Wall Street got sort of eaten up by, actually you can't do that. You can't do outright fraud. You can't manipulate the markets to screw over the little guy anymore. And that's why crypto came in, to allow people to do that again. That's the main thing that crypto is for, is to allow rich people to screw over the little guy more. And I'm actually surprised, perhaps this is just a revelation yet to come. And it is interesting that I, and I really applaud what Dropsite is doing here, is because they're doing something that a lot of folks haven't been willing to do. And they're not focusing on the salacious stuff, which honestly, there's been a lot of big, like, boom revelations recently, like the birthday book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like, honestly, so a bunch of rich guys in the late night, around the turn of the century, I think it was like 99 or 2000, wrote a really pervy and gross like birthday book for one of their rich pervy friends. Like, it's
Yes.
gross. It's disgusting. It's an insight into the culture of the very rich. It's an insight to the culture of men. You know, it's an insight to, I mean, frankly, like I recall, traveling in circles, not like that, obviously not those resources, but like, I was in locker rooms in the 90s, like it's like that way of, joking about underage women, some cases actually pursuing underage women, thinking it's funny to talk about that sort of thing. That's the kind of stuff. I mean, that's very Jack Kennedy. That's very, I mean, this is just culture as it was and culture as it still is in more circumspect ways.
But it did get rid of Peter Mandelson, so
Well, there's that.
that's worked
There's
out
that to be
well.
grateful for. But what I think is what's interesting is what Dropsite is doing is infinitely more threatening to the powerful than than like, oh my gosh, look at what these baby boomers did 20 years ago and look how creepy and gross they are. Because you'll notice there's nothing for a prosecution here. There's nothing new here. There's nothing sort of exciting there. And something about Epstein that has always surprised me is like, look, like and it's a tweet from actually a drop site, not even one of the main authors on the drop site article we're going to talk about. He made a tweet that I think is almost worth reading in full because it sort of
Hmm.
clarifies this stuff. Like, what's really puzzling to me is this idea that like Jeffrey Epstein was able to own a large house on off of Fifth Avenue on the Upper East Side, like one of the largest mansions in the city, one of the most expensive pieces of property in the world, off of running like a child sex ring. Like that makes no sense. Or like a blackmail ring, like that. Even that makes absolutely no sense. Like if you're like a blackmailer or a pimp, like you don't go do high profile stuff like this. And I think the baseline assumption of people who assume that there's going to be like big revelations coming talking about, salacious stuff. They're like, well, that's the disconnect. They're like, wait a second, how does he live like this doing petty gross crime? Like, as I think we talked about, like the Elon Musk example, like how exactly does he meet like 22-year-old actresses, to date for a decade? Like there's a whole industry of people doing what Jeffrey Epstein did fundamentally, which was introduce powerful men to young women. And they're not high profile people. They're not people that like prime ministers want to come talk to. So a lot of people have been making this assumption like, well, there's some kind of deep intelligence connection. And like actually, and people are like, oh, like putting financier in like quotation marks or whatnot.
Hmm.
But actually what Epstein was like peddling influence. He's within that like weird network of, so it's not just crypto that people ran into to get away from public markets and having to be like, gee, I don't know, like I think, AT&T is going to go up next year, so we should buy that. Another thing they ran into is like private equity and venture capital and creating large pools of money. And that's what Jeffrey Epstein did. I think people assume there's something darker and deeper here because there's not enough awareness of how dark and deep the role of financier is. It's these large pools of money that have taken over more and more of the world economy. And they're intended to do so. They're popular because they are out of the public eye. So it's
Mm.
actually not that strange that there would not be a lot of insight into what this guy who was doing private equity investments and had like $100 million from like a Victoria's Secret guy and like was able to, because you consider Epstein's address book and everyone's like, oh, like this is insane. Like, look at this address book full of all these freaking pedophiles. But Epstein's address book, what he was able to do, the connections he was able to cultivate became like a snowball running downhill.
Hmm.
It's like Ehud Barak, it seems pretty clear to me, was not looking to diddle underage women. If he was, he'd have easier access to that in Israel somewhere or or in Europe somewhere with a much more deniable person who didn't shake hands with Bill Clinton. Like, think about this. If you were Ehud Barak and you wanted to get into some child prostitution, would you want to go hang out with like the semi-celebrity guy who's friends with Bill Clinton to do your child prostitution? Hell no. You'd find somebody local you could control and quietly kill. It's not a logical thing, but it confuses people. Like, why does everybody want to work with this guy, be around this guy, go to this guy's parties? And what Dropsite is doing is actually explaining the sort of piddly, nitty gritty, boring stuff. He's got a big house and he knows Bill Clinton and he knows Bill Gates and he knows people in the Israeli government and he knows, and specifically like Jeffrey Epstein's relationship to Israel. And this is actually something like that's kind of fascinating. And it always used to like sort of bother me at like, like when I was abroad, it's like the most sinister thing you could accuse an American of being is working for the CIA. And it's just like, I'm sorry, I hang out with the people that the CIA works for. Like the CIA is like one of many like sort of contractors that can be used by wealthy people in the United States and elsewhere to accomplish dirty ends, to make the business deals. And like Jeffrey Epstein was a facilitator of the business deals. And we're encouraged, actually, I think we are kind of encouraged, and people are rewarded to like look into the salacious aspects, look into the really sketchy, gross aspects, because, I think most powerful people know that they were doing their really sketchy, gross stuff somewhere else, like not on an island with Bill Gates and Bill Clinton, like they were doing. And that like the more we look for this sketchy stuff, like we're like making big deals out of essentially like a gross chain email from 20 years ago, like the less attention we're paying to what Jeffrey Epstein was actually doing. Because if you pay attention to what Jeffrey Epstein was actually doing, you get a deeper insight to just how corrupt and how bleak and how dedicated to just screwing over the little guy all these powerful people are. So I guess we lack the knowledge, that the language that we used to have, which is more like old school New Deal Democrat, or I guess kind of, it used to be a liberal thing, but now liberal is just, code for, we want our banks to be gayer.
Yeah.
But we seem to lack the language for, these people are just sleazy, corrupt people who are betraying the people who voted for them, who don't deserve the power they have, who are becoming unreasonably wealthy through connections and backroom deals. Like, we don't have the language to condemn that anymore, because for 50 years, sort of the Reagan era, we've been celebrating that. And I guess Jeffrey Epstein's rather useful because, yeah, if everybody knows him as a sex criminal, I think that what Dropsite is doing is amazing, because they are just making the connections, and there are so many connections to be made. Like,
Are most financiers like this? Because I'm hearing about another one. He's involved in torturing women and stuff in New York. He was doing this on his own. It doesn't seem like his wife was involved in to get women and stuff, but it just seems like they're very well connected, very wealthy people that always seem to be up to something horrific on the side.
Well, I think that's a key thing here. Like, I'm participating in talking about Epstein because it's going to allow us to talk about some much more useful things like Israel, the Israeli arms industry, the way that politics and business are interweaved. But like, Jeffrey Epstein is one of hundreds, if not thousands, of these guys in the New York area, and tens of thousands of these guys worldwide. I think Epstein is legitimately strange because he's also a sex criminal. Like, he's also a sex criminal. No, he's legitimately strange because he like is a sex criminal who like was this bad at hiding his, he just got arrogant. He just got like sort of wealthy people, people are people. A lot of people have a wide variety of sexual interests and what have you. The thing about wealthy people is that they can usually indulge them more than other folks do. I don't think that, who knows? Maybe there's some overrepresentation of sex criminals among financiers or Wall Street guys or merchant bankers, like they used to call them. But I don't know. It's a cliche that, strip clubs and sex industry makes a lot of money off of investment bankers and whatnot, but they also make a lot of money off of truckers. I don't know whether it's a money thing. I think money just sort of accelerates like a, you know,
what they were originally.
like a dude thing, you know? Like, you know, I've been to bachelor parties, you know, and bachelor parties with a bunch of guys who, you know, make under 100 grand. It's, you know, it's fairly tame. If, you know, the higher up you go with that, things can get further out of control. But I would like to just read this tweet, which I found so instructive, just really very helpful, clarified my own thinking, and talk about why I found this. So this guy is Wakas. Is his Twitter name. I think he's at the end of the article we've been talking about that we linked in the description. So you can get his full name. At Workas, Worqas. If you spend a considerable amount of time down this rabbit hole, it becomes clear how this specific racket works. Epstein did not work for Mossad. He was not running a blackmail operation. There was no need to blackmail. Everyone who associated with Epstein did it voluntarily. They were not motivated by threats of blackmail. They were motivated by greed. They weren't afraid of being caught. They were afraid of missing out on the amazing opportunities and fun Epstein provided. And Epstein himself was a supranational entity floating above it all with access to networks and finance that it is impossible to put together by a single individual. If you consider Israel a proper country and a nation, you would fall into the trap of thinking Epstein worked for Mossad, working for the interests of Israel. But consider this for a second and redo your calculations just to see if it makes sense. Israel is not a regular country. It is an entity that exists to provide sovereign cover to a network of billionaires and allows them a financial and regulatory home base that can circumvent international laws and local laws in other countries. Even ordinary Israeli citizens are victims of and are being used by this entity. In this system, Epstein is a part of a network that all these people named in the emails are also a part of. They make international deals on behalf of each other and share resources. Israel is a substructure that allows all this. Mossad, then, is just an intelligence arm of this loose confederation of billionaires. After reading all these emails, this makes a lot more sense to me. So I think, Wakas, I find that really, really, really helpful, but I would actually go a little further than that. I don't think it's just Israel. I think this is just the way most countries work in our Reagan era. It's the level of corruption in, we spent a lot of time just sort of diving in on a number of countries, country by country, and it seems like every single one of them has some outrageous corruption scandal that is facilitated by people like Epstein. So yeah, Epstein is just a small part of the story. And I think the desperate attempts to attach him to something more salacious, and then Israel, and then Mossad, like are sort of, I mean, I'm sure there's stuff to find, but it's like, that's not the really scandalous thing about Epstein. The scandalous thing is that, like, all these powerful people didn't want to be around Epstein for the sex parties. They could find sex parties freaking anywhere. They wanted to be around him for the connections. They wanted to be around him for the opportunities for graft and corruption. And that's what Epstein's about. I am so excited for this drop site series because they say specifically in the opening pages that this article is the first in a series that will explore Epstein's work on behalf of Israeli military interests, particularly as it relates to his role in the development of Israel's cyber warfare industry. The rise of Israel's cyber surveillance and weapons industry has been one of the most significant geopolitical developments of the past 2 decades, making sophisticated hacking tools available as turnkey packages to police and military around the world. The spread of zero-click exploits that require no interaction from targets, coupled with the proliferation of web-connected devices in homes, offices, and manufacturing facilities, has transformed what is possible for spy agencies and those in their orbit. In the shadows of Israel's cyber boom was Jeffrey Epstein, who exploited his network of political and financial elites to help Barack and ultimately the Israeli government itself to increase the penetration of Israel's spy tech firms into foreign countries. Epstein actively supported the Israeli intelligence industry via venture capital investments and contributions to charitable organizations, non-governmental entities that laid the foundation for official Israeli security deal-making. It's something that I've wanted for a long time, frankly.
It's believed that it's the Iranian hacker group has released these emails that this is based on. It's not 100% confirmed that it's Iran, but everyone seems to think it is.
Yes, it's sort of a pro-Palestine hacking group that's been working overtime since October 7th that is plausibly connected to Iranian security services. But nobody's disputing the emails and
No.
what they say. So, yeah, what is it, Donald Trump said, hey, leak whatever you want, It's like, what did Donald Trump had some great thing about Russia hacking Hillary's emails? Like, go for it.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Oh, okay. It's backfired.
I suppose.
But we still haven't mentioned the country this is nearly all about, which is Mongolia, which surprised me anyway.
Well, I think that's I think that's sort of an indication of just sort of how like nickel and diming, Ehud Barak is, just sort of like scrabbling around. It's like, Mongolia, that's where we can get something done. And
because Mongolia is very poor. It only has, 3 million people. It sort of feels like it should have loads of people because it's like beside Russia and China, but incredibly poor and, surrounded by two giants. And I think it had like a couple of it had like 3 bad winters in a row, which meant they had to forego their nomadic lifestyle and then move to the city. So it has been a country with a lot of issues. So just the fact
I
that
think Mongolia has actually become a sort of resource, and they talk about it in these emails, has become, it is a very resource-rich country. And if you look at GDP per capita, it's rising heavily. I'm sure that GDP per capita is not distributed fairly. But I haven't actually... I've seen Mongolia characterized as surprisingly democratically run. I'm sure that that's just a variety of oligarchs, figuring out how to manage things. But they're certainly seen as more democratic than either of its neighbors, Russia or China, supported by resource wealth. But what's interesting is it seemed like a good target for what Epstein and Barak were trying to do. And it's just like the most depressing thing for me is just Barak just sort of constantly hitting up Epstein, being like, "Hey man, do you think you could remind the other parties to this transaction to pay me?" Like it's just like this is this guy was the
pathetic.
prime minister of a country we're supposed to respect, and he was like sending emails to Epstein, being like, "Hey man, I think it's to the freelance, like he's like some freelancer, being like, "Hey man, it's time for me to get paid," and it's just like. It's just so sordid, it's very disappointing, but I think like this is the level at which all this stuff functions. The article on Mongolia is fascinating. I mean, so Israel and Mongolia signed a cooperation agreement designed to facilitate the takeover, perhaps creation of Mongolia's emergency services technology by an Israeli company. And it's just sort of interesting because this gets at the heart of like this whole startup nation. I wouldn't say mythology, it's very real, but what startup nation is in Israel is fundamentally a story of, and I'm not saying, Epstein is, of course, above Israel and above Mossad. These are tools that work for him and other Wall Street rich people. But Epstein has an affinity for Israel. So like, as we were talking about recently with Taiwan and semiconductors, it is, Epstein was part of that class of American billionaires who, thinks very highly of Israel and wants to, first and foremost, make money. Second, make connections that allow him to continue to be at the hub of things. But if it works, sure, let's do this stuff in Israel. And that's sort of like how this was working. So this 2017 deal between Mongolia and Israel was, not particularly major. This is sort of small ball, but like it was for a company that was set up through a large loan from Jeffrey Epstein of $1 million. And it seems like a very small amount of money, actually, but set up by Jeffrey Epstein for, $1 million odd. The pre-planning through a nonprofit, which is kind of a very interesting insight into sort of how all these, the institute, the International Peace Institute or something like that. Is
They all have lovely names.
Set up an advisory board, including Larry Summers of all people, and all 12 people on the advisory board get $100,000 each to be part of the advisory board. And the planning for all this is done in Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. So the planning for Israeli security arrangements with Mongolia, startup nation stuff, is planned. This is something that took place over the course of years. It's planned in his mansion in New York.
Mhm.
A year or so on, things aren't going so well. Ehud Barak is begging Epstein to sort of, facilitate things, because Jeffrey Epstein is a much more powerful individual than a former Israeli prime minister and defense minister, which is
That's
just,
pretty depressing.
it's incredibly depressing. So he's sort of begging him to, get the ball rolling more. And so Jeffrey Epstein has, I believe it was the prime minister and the foreign minister of Mongolia over to his Manhattan mansion to hash out the details of this deal between Israel and Mongolia, in which Ehud Barak is going to get a slice, and it's just sordid. It appears that the IPI, the International Peace Institute, because it's Norwegian and Norway still has some kind of semblance of a non-corrupt society. It seems like that eventually did become a scandal in Norway, and the guy had to resign. But it's just extraordinary. And this is how everything runs, how everything works. And so your question about financiers was really great, because what the hell is a financier? What does that even mean? It's just like, there's a whole wide variety of classes of
Mhm.
capital, like pools of money, and then
Because
titles.
there are like financial experts, but they're like, "Oh, this is your money. This is what you should do with it." Rarely do you just sort of throw money at them and say, "Make it more."
Oh, well, so as you go further up the money, like, you do that more and more. That happens more and
Oh,
more.
okay.
So like if you go up to, like, I was a stockbroker once, had Series
Mhm.
7 back around the turn of the century, the first tech boom. Sure, like a financial advisor, if you've got like $100,000 or $20,000, is someone who'll talk to you for a half hour and say, buy some ETFs, buy some exchange traded funds, or maybe you want something else, and da. If you go up to like $1 million, you do have people who'll be like, okay, cool, pay me like a percent a year and I'll just do what I can. And over the course of years, like, maybe they're good and they've got, they do significantly better than the chunk they're taking. If they're not, then you go ahead. So like, that's in the millions of dollars. When you get up to where Epstein was, which is like the hundreds of millions of dollars, and certainly this is what Saudi Arabia is doing. I mean, my association, for lack of a better term, is a financier. It's like, when you have bigger and bigger pools of money, it becomes harder and harder to find the deals. And it's not about, finding, like, we have this image that somehow still persists with people, that like that what really matters is like finding the smart thing. Like, I'm investing in this AI and, oh, I've decided that 8 months from now, copper is going to be the good thing. So I'm dumping a bunch. There's some of that. That's what hedge fund managers do. Like, they all try to do that. They famously have made a lot less money than just buying Google over the past 15 years. But like those people exist, and they are serious. But the real money, what like Saudi Arabia is looking for, what a lot of the people who are talking to Jeffrey Epstein are looking for, are deals that are put together through influence, that yield incredible amounts of money and just aren't available to other people, aren't available to most people, like the entire U.S. healthcare industry. Like, I am sure there is a Jeffrey Epstein of like the healthcare, and there are 15 Jeffrey Epsteins of the healthcare industry within 5 miles of where I'm sitting, who would never dream of trying to be involved in the sex industry or whatever, but they are making money the same way that Jeffrey Epstein made money, which was facilitating deals for large pools of money.
They'll be into like rare turtles or something.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be into whatever they're into, but like, I think people don't appreciate like every worst imagining about what rich men get up to from Jeffrey Epstein is 100% true. I mean, like, I don't know, like eating kids or whatever, but like definitely awful, randy,
Horrific events.
rich dudes, wanting to have sex with children or what have you. Sure, 100%. But like, it's fucking weird that like Jeffrey Epstein became like an interface of that kind of like activity and the financier and the money activity.
But is it
Mhm.
horrible that a lot of people basically knew what he was up to? Like famously, Trump is like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
like young women, but
Mhm.
Epstein likes them really young."
Yeah.
Like it seems to be an open joke what he was up to. So even if you weren't involved in it, would you be like, "Why am I working with this pedophile?"
Oh, have you heard what's I can't recall what his name is, but do you know Lindy Man on Twitter?
I've heard the name.
So
I'll
the
look it
the
up.
idea, he's just I guess a commentator who comes up with interesting social commentary. His big thing is Lindy. It's something is Lindy if it's something that people have been doing for decades or centuries, and something it's probably more worthwhile if it's something that's, people have always been doing or whatever. But he has this other theory, which is the vulgar era or something like that. And he
Okay.
ties it to an obsession with sort of the 18 to 25 male sort of advertising demographic or what have you. But really, society has always been patriarchal. Society has always been, or at least, the societies we came from have always been patriarchal, have always had issues around that. But something to do with like the breakdown of a lot of the traditional constraints on that, religious, societal, shame, what have you, had us rampaging in the name of freedom or sexual freedom, all kinds of freedom, had us sort of basically throwing out all of those standards. And this guy, the Lindy Man guy, he comes up with the vulgar era. And I think he puts it somewhere between like the mid 90s and like, honestly, the first Trump administration, where you just look at like the kind of stuff that we were expected to consume and were expected to find funny, and were expected to find a lot of the rebellion against Biden from comedians is a bunch of men who became rich and famous in the like, yeah, it's funny to like talk about abusing women, and it's funny to like talk about I think one of the greatest things was Jimmy Kimmel himself. There was some clip of The Man Show. Do you remember The Man Show?
No, I've
So
never heard of it.
Jimmy Kimmel is a late night host who's recently fallen afoul of the Trump administration, the FCC. Disney sort of took him off the air, then they put him back on the air or what have you. And it's interesting that he's being held up as this sort of like anti-Trump values, like liberal bastion, because he became famous with this thing on Comedy Central called The Man Show. It's probably 20 years ago now, that he actually hosted with this guy, Adam Carolla, who is now like is someone who's now marketing himself as a complete right-wing influencer, might have like a news radio show or what have you. But The Man Show was just basically like, the joke was that there were young women in like,
The audience are working at the show? Or?
No. Young women in like schoolgirl outfits.
Oh.
Jumping on trampolines. That's how like that.
Okay.
That's in
that's the joke.
That's in every episode. There was some clip I saw recently. Someone on Twitter had found like some kind of thing where like a woman's looking through a telescope and Jimmy Kimmel like comes up behind her and is like humping her and stuff. And it's
okay.
That was what was funny back then.
Welcome back to The Man Show. Let me tell you about my wife, Gina. She is quite a woman. Juggles getting the kids off to school, and well, that's about it. Which got me wondering, while I'm at work, what the hell does she do all day?
Britney Spears came to national prominence in 1997 with a hypersexualized video as a teenager of her wearing a little schoolgirl outfit, being like, go look at the video for Hit Me Baby One More Time. Came out in the era that Jeffrey Epstein, that all these powerful men thought it was funny to write a book to Jeffrey Epstein talking about how he likes underage women, and sign it with their names. They thought it was funny and cool. And like, that's just like, that is the vulgar era. Like, that is just where things were in the late 90s through. And what's interesting is it's a backlash, because before woke, there was a heavily politically correct culture in the early 1990s, perhaps unfairly associated with Hillary Clinton, but that was sort of like political correctness. And then you had like figures like Howard Stern and a whole bunch of other figures who like rampaged against that. And that was like, we're going to be as crass as possible. And doesn't that make us fun? And honestly, we've kind of done like a miniature version of that now with Trump and all these sort of Joe Rogan.
And then we're off to Saudi Arabia to tell jokes.
Yes.
Have you heard about this?
Yes, I have. Yeah. But so like, yeah, I think that it's yes, of course, Jeffrey Epstein's disgusting, but like, American culture is pretty disgusting. And it's interesting, this sort of this outrage at this Epstein stuff. And it's like, yeah, like this is what the anti-woke warriors want to bring us back to joke about sex with underage women.
Horrific sex crimes.
Yeah, it's funny to like, and Pete Hegseth, we were talking about Pete Hegseth, the head of the Department of War, who called all the military people together to talk about how we need to stop caring about political correct stuff and we want legality, not lethality. And one of the things he was talking about is how annoying it is that our reputations are being undermined by these baseless accusations.
I remember hearing that because he was talking about how, like, oh, we'll still not have like sexual assault, but like we don't need all these checks. And I'm like, well, it's only going to get worse if you're not doing the checks.
And that's also, I mean, that goes all the way back to Tailhook, which was a famous Army scale sex scandal of the 1990s. So these things are just ricocheting back and forth. But like, I think if folks who, have mostly been very politically aware over the past decade, like it might be surprised because woke is being smashed, or we're like, no, like woke shifted the culture in very dramatic ways, and Trump and a bunch of comedians and Pete Hegseth are trying to push back. But the fact that people are outraged by what Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and Woody Allen were writing in this birthday book 20 years ago is a sign that they've failed. Like you can't go, and thank God, like it's not cool or fun that, certainly it's horrific and illegal, all the teenagers that may or may not have been on Epstein's island, but it's also not cool or fun that he was like a 40 or 50 something, shipping all these 22-year-old models down to like come and I assure you that aspect of it happens in everywhere there's money in the world to this day. And like, yeah, so it's like societal shifts is what's going on with the Epstein thing. But like specifically this particular thing and its connection, it sort of reveals a lot of what goes on with these deals and just how shady they are. Like there should be, with something
more
like
transparency, basically.
No, there's certainly there should be more transparency. Like we should live in a world where governments decide what kind of services they may want, and then have government functionaries who go out and see what's available. But we've been kind of against that since Ronald Reagan. And now, of course, we had, up until Trump, we had this thing called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that tried to install a little bit more of transparency and a little less blatant corruption around business that financiers did abroad. But that's over now. In the second Trump administration, they are no longer even looking into any of that. So yeah, in a sane world, we would have governments going out procuring the services that they need, but we've created this world where this sort of Reaganite world where all kinds of sleazy guys. I mean, Tony Blair has got to be the biggest example, right?
Well, yeah, you know the recent thing with him.
What?
He was obsessed with ID cards for his whole term. So what was that, 20 years ago? So now we're getting ID cards, and you'd never guess who owns a company. His son owns a company that makes ID cards, digital ID cards. So yes, but no, he's in like a think tank. He's made a think tank that still has massive power around the world, as far as I'm aware.
And let's give credit where it's due. The Clintons really pioneered a lot of this. If you want to really just drive yourself insane one evening, Google Teneo, Teneo, Teneo Global, Teneo this, Teneo that. It's just this big network of consultancies and Teneo this and Teneo that all worked in and around the Clinton family, the Clinton's advisors, the Clinton foundations. And this is the kind of work they do. They travel around the world taking big slices out of deals between countries.
So if you distilled Epstein, it would turn into Teneo.
I mean, honestly, yeah. And I think there's this desperate hope on the part of conservative folks that like Epstein is going to end up so deeply connected to the Clintons, and they're hoping it's going to be some kind of adrenochrome child, murder, blah, 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 blah. But what it is it's this kind of thing. It's the same kind of business. It's the same kind of business that Tony Blair does. It's the same kind of business. And Jeffrey Epstein was really good at putting themselves in the middle. Like, where do deals happen? Like, deals like this happen at parties, at like dinner parties, like the kinds of parties that Jeffrey Epstein threw at his mansion. There's this image that Epstein's mansion was all about sex parties, but it was probably more about having the Mongolian foreign minister over to dinner and making him sit and talk to the old Israeli prime minister so the old Israeli prime minister could get paid, And I don't think that Epstein only did this work around Israel. I think he did it anywhere he could make money. Like, there's this great like mystification about like, how did Epstein make all this money? It's like, how do you think most of the people who buy the $250 million apartments in New York City made their money? It's stuff like this, you know, it's stuff like this. It's running funds, you know, it is. And it's not like, I'm not saying that all of the people doing this are like corrupt, like, you know, sex deviants. We created an environment where this kind of work can happen intentionally. It's been to the great detriment of economic growth in the United States over the past 50 years. It's been to the great detriment of American democracy over the past 50 years. Look what we have as president. It's been to great detriment of world peace, world stability. But, you know, at least we have more rich people.
Oh, that's always good. That's something we need more of.
Yes, yeah. That's what we needed. That's what you know, the folks in charge of the United States and their infinite wisdom decided what we needed. And who boy did we get it? Who boy did we get it? So we've got a lot more Jeffrey Epsteins. And yeah, specifically, I'm very excited. I think everyone should go out there and subscribe to Dropsite News. It is a very interesting organization founded by the two guys who, probably two of the most interesting guys at The Intercept. I don't know if you guys remember The Intercept. It was sort of Glenn Greenwald's outfit. And then Glenn Greenwald had a falling out with everybody else at The Intercept, as he sort of, I think Glenn Greenwald was quite rightly thought that the Russia hoax was absolute BS. But Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill, we've done a whole episode on Jeremy Scahill's Drone Wars book here on the podcast. Two very serious, very interesting journalists, people I follow on Twitter, people I respect massively, started Dropsite News. And it's not just their track record, it's before they got there, at Dropsite News, they've been continuing to churn out really interesting stuff. And I think they are worth subscribing to. And I'm really, really excited for this. Well, first off, I hope we've managed to make this Mongolia, Israel, Epstein article, this first in their series, sound interesting. Because there's just so much more in there to just read that and just be like, this is how business is done. And like in Turkey, in circles in the United States, I've been lucky to you know, much more in Turkey than in the United States, where I'm on a much lower level. But like, I've sort of occasionally been in rooms or been around documents that like sort of show how the sausage is made, and this Mongolia, Epstein, Israel article is probably like, if you're truly interested in how the world really works, who's really screwing us over, what the real scandals are, I would urge you to look into this. I would urge you to read this, you know, not as salacious and fun as reading the birthday book, but this is what's really happening.
But there is the phrase, "I hope you have fun on the island" as well.
Yes,
which,
yes. Well, and that's the thing, because they're like, oh yeah, they like, you know, the depth. It's people I respect, frankly, and I, you know, they Dropsite included that because that's the most salacious sounding thing in these emails, and they want to talk about it. But a lot of commentators I actually respect and normally really enjoy are just like making so much out of like, is this a special code word? Like they're basically, you know, a lot of really respectable left-leaning folks are like turning into pizza gators. You know, they're like the guy who shot up a pizza restaurant because they thought there were children in the
kids
basement.
in the basement.
Yeah.
But it didn't have a basement.
Yeah. And again, Jeffrey Epstein, gross, definitely facilitated sex with gross, dumb, powerful people, like with young women and maybe even minors.
An absolute monster of a human.
Awful. But what's really going on is what Dropsite News is shedding more light on. And I think if you're just interested in like what's really happening, I would urge you to subscribe to Dropsite and continue to follow this series. I mean, and there's so much more in this article we didn't get to, like there's Peter Thiel.
Yes, I was like, that horrible, disgusting man that couldn't say no that he wasn't the Antichrist.
And there's just the details of like the connections between Silicon Valley types and the IDF intelligence directorates or whatever. And it's just the fact that like Epstein is chiefly about making money and making connections and making his life amazing. But if Epstein, and again, Epstein is just one of hundreds of people like him, or the other folks like him, or the dozens of people like him who like can make it work for Israel, they're interested in making it work for Israel, in part because, that'll help them on the New York City social scene, if they can make that case. And just the connections between Silicon Valley and the startup nation and the Israeli military, and the fact that this whole startup nation thing is mostly, if not directly genocide related companies, but it's security companies, it is technology security companies, it is all this big military industrial complex mess. And I am more delighted, frankly, that Dropsite News is going to be looking into this a little bit, because I've been hungry for some real reporting on this. But I'm delighted that they're figuring out how to market this series by putting Jeffrey Epstein smack in the middle of it, which is where he was. I guess this is why I wanted to talk about this.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll be keeping an eye when the drops come out and what they entail. So check out that site. Well, wishing you all the best. Ciao, ciao.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire: What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.